who am I? We'll go ahead and get started. Hello, I'm Varun. Had a little bit of an introduction before, but I'm the head of research at Apple and Banana, which we'll talk about. I'm also an associate research manager at Best Buy, looking at services. My background, a lot of text you're going to see tonight. The goal is not to read things at you, but to have a conversation, tell you a story, and expand the way that you think about research. So we're going to be sending out the deck. Don't worry. So focus on consuming the content and so just reading line by line, because I won't be. I also like, I'm fun, I like my family and podcasts and cooking and scary movies. This is so you know me as a person, because it's a pandemic and we can't really go anywhere, but this is who I am really quickly. And on the other side is, what is Apple Banana? You see these characters throughout this presentation. What is it? It was started back in 2018 in January when I was frustrated. I wanted cool research content that made research seem dynamic and vibrant and important, because that's what it was like to me. I couldn't really find it. So I figured, why not go ahead and create it? And it's been a journey ever since. And this is Apple Bananas, where we want to think about research being accessible and engaging and insightful, and above all else, practical. Can we give you practical knowledge that tomorrow you can think, hey, I can apply this and actually slowly change the way that my team does research? And our larger goal is to slowly build a product design culture where research is seen as a flexible, vibrant, and critical part of building any experience. It doesn't mean the next big app, but it could be a way that we help people vote or find healthcare or anything like that. Research should be a part of that experience. And so really quickly, why do we use fruit? People always ask, and I figured we could get this out of the way. It's universal. A is for apple, B is for banana, common in any sort of educational literature. It's simple. The fruits are the people. That's it. The fruits can do things that people do. They get into sticky situations, they have meetings, they get upset with each other. And then finally, it's also approachable. Using these characters, we have actually expanded the way we can think about research. So now we can use metaphors and different kind of illustrations to talk about statistical significance, right? We can make abstract, scary ideas into something much more simple and approachable. And right now we're working on a book. We can talk about that if we have time. And we've got a bunch of ideas for after the book. How do we continue to build this Apple and Banana universe? So with that out of the way, a bit about me, getting to know you. I see some comments. Andy and Jason, I believe, if you guys want to look at the comments, let me know if I should stop, slow down, speed up, that kind of stuff. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into this presentation. Building flexible research roadmaps. What is that? Well, let's start off with the story. Let's say it takes you 4 weeks to run a single study. Every single time. This is an abstract world, so every time it's always 4 weeks. The first week is for planning. What are we going to study? What's important? What should we learn? The next week is for recruitment and preparation. I'm going to get some participants, make an interview guide, make sure my testing location, whatever, that's all good. Third week is for collecting data, right? What are we going to do? We're going to sit down with people. This is the time spent in the chair. And then that last week is for analysis and reporting. Put something together. Here's a quick deliverable. So 4 weeks, a solid month. If you do the math, and I have, trust me, there are 52 weeks in a year. And if it takes you 4 weeks to run one study, how many studies can you run per year? It's not a big number. So if you do the math, you can run a max of 13 studies per year if it takes you 1 month to go out and actually fruitfully study something and bring it back to your team. But when the messiness of the world, right, your product owner decides to take PTO the time that you need him, you get sick, you fall down a flight of stairs, right? Craziness happens. It's really more like 8 to 11 studies. So the question isn't what you should study. It's about reframing that idea about how do you spend the right time studying the right thing? How do you say no to as many bad questions as possible and then be able to discern it and say, this is important for us to learn as a group. Let's set on that. So today we're going to talk about a research philosophy that we use at the Apple and Banana team and some practical strategies that you should be able to take tomorrow. Today's Thursday, the days are blending. Today's Thursday, tomorrow on Friday, you should be able to take at least one of these ideas and start to think about how you can apply it to your life. And so we're going to use these strategies to build this flexible research roadmap. So first, let's review some ideas so we can make all the content a little bit easier to digest. Once again, the deck will be sent out, right? So you don't have to read every single line or scribble to take notes. Just focus on paying attention and let's have a conversation at the end. So what should you really quickly kind of know? First, is this fruitful research philosophy. This is what we believe, and has a few different kind of areas or levels. First is ethical. Good research is always ethical. It has to be valuable or important and desirable for your stakeholders. It has to be meaningful for your participants. And finally, it has to be sustainable for you. Let's break this down. Ethical. We define that as people are not being treated as people. They're being treated as data points. They are reduced into a cell on a spreadsheet. They're not rich. They're not complex. They're not messy. It's not a living, breathing, screaming human being. It is just a 0 and a 1 on your spreadsheet. We believe that is unethical research. Valuable means, how is this research affecting the perspective or the decision-making for the people that you work with? Is it going to change the way they look at the product, the experience, the segment, what have you? Meaningful is, how does the study best respect the energy, time, and expectations of people? All research is a request. It's a request for information to learn together. How do you make it as meaningful that your time spent is not just a 100,000 question survey and the chance of winning a $25 Amazon gift card, but it's a meaningful use of giving information and feeling heard. And then finally, sustainable. How are you going to respect yourself throughout this process? If you're running qualitative or quantitative, mixed methods, data science, any kind of research, you are an active participant in this process. How do you think about what you're doing today so you set up tomorrow for a success instead of just wasting all your time and energy on the single one best study? Now, the next 3 slides, we're going to speed through for the sake of time, but it'll be sent out in the deck. And this is the idea of long-term versus short-term research, tactical and strategic goals. I'm going to go quickly, and we'll get back to it as needed if we have time at the end. So we're looking at this, and then we'll go to the next one where it breaks down this idea of short-term research, and then the other side for long-term research. That way you've got a chance to go back to look at the deck. You can go ahead and have conversations. If you want to talk about some of these ideas, feel free to reach out, but we're going to keep going. So with that said, what is a research roadmap? What, you came here to see this concept of research road mapping. What the heck is it? Well, we define it as a document that kind of shows the aligned direction, topics, and deadlines that a single researcher is committing to study. Now, on the right side, you can see an illustration. The important part of research road mapping, it's not about the document. It's not about this visual. The minute you set this up, it's likely to change. So the process is what matters. The process of getting people aligning and prioritizing and coming together and saying, this is what's important for us to learn. Not these other things. There's an infinite number of things we could study, but these things are the most important. We've got yay time and this many resources to actually go ahead and study it. So road mapping, you can make a document, but it's the process that really matters. So why should you make it? Less fatigue, you know what's coming down the road. You know, if you've got a big study or a short study coming up, you have time to improve operations. If you know at the end of your roadmap or of the time you've planned out, you've got something unmoderated and you don't have a tool for running unmoderated research, you've got the time built to actually set that up with procurement and vendors. Increase focus. If you want to do impactful research, you have to study impactful things. So when your team tells you these are the things that are the most important, there's focus there, and there's a significantly higher chance that your research is used in the day-to-day. You can also increase the study design quality. Instead of saying, let's scramble and just do a quick survey, you can be much more meaningful about how you design and collect qualitative, quantitative, or mixed data. And lastly, you can increase the research pace. If you look at this on the surface level, it looks like we're going to be running more and more research. That's not the goal. If you're struggling to get research out the road, me telling you to run more research, not very practical. The goal of research road mapping, though, is to increase how much you learn per study, right? That is the shift. It's that every time we go out to learn something, we bring back a treasure trove of knowledge and we disseminate it out, and we can all be smarter, not just study, 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 study. So what does it look like? And I want to show you like an example of a roadmap because I know people are waiting. What does it look like? But really quickly, it also depends on where you work, right? Everything in UX, it depends. It also depends on what type of research model that you work in. So there's kind of two big models out there. There's ones that's embedded versus one that's centralized. In an embedded model, it's just one researcher for a specific product area or a business area, studying that team's questions, where they're with them over time. On the centralized model, this diagram should be modified a little bit, but centralized is different teams go to a centralized area or a researcher and ask, can we have these things studied? And they plan for multiple teams. The road mapping idea works for both, but it depends on how you set it up based on the environment that you actually work in. So on the next slide, we're going to go ahead and see our version of a research roadmap. And I have to stress, you're going to get me tired of this. It is not the document, it is not this diagram or the design that matters. It is the process and the intention behind it that you build with your team. So on the top here, we've got an embedded type roadmap. On the bottom, we've got a centralized one. A lot of stuff happening, a lot of visual stimulus, a lot of overload. Let's take this down and look at what's actually happening and look at each element. So what does it look like? So let's say this is our research roadmap. Can people see my mouse? Is this working?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, thank you. So this is our research roadmap. We've got some lanes here. We've got 2 different dates on this side. We've got some blocks, this thing called intake. It seems like a lot happening. So let's break this down. Each lane that you see represents a distinct research area or topic. For example, if you're a company that sells online, has an e-commerce platform for socks, maybe the first lane is looking at the checkout flow and how that works with digital coupons. Maybe the second lane is looking at product tracking for the socks so it gets you on time, so there's no returns or delays. And maybe that third lane has to do with a bigger, maybe more strategic study. We make socks, are people interested in us making shirts, right? So each distinct lane has a different area of learning. Within each lane is a block. This is like you're saying this much time to this type of study. There is an estimation here. There's obviously a buffer zone. You can't just say 10 days we'll learn everything, but you have to map that out in your time. So you put that here. If there are 2 blocks that overlap, that means you're committing to running 2+ studies at one time. So in this case, you've got 2 different lanes. The goal is, if you are having to run 2 studies at one time, can you find overlap between lanes or the teams that you're running them for, so everyone can benefit more instead of running 2 distinct independent lines of research? In the first state here, that should be at least 2 weeks. That's a general type estimate. If you're trying to plan research, you can't just plan and start tomorrow. You want to be much more thoughtful on what you're studying. So at least 2 weeks from today. Then on the other side, it's 3 months away or the next 90 days. This concept of next 90 days, we'll get back to it. But this last part is more or less what truly matters. This is what makes research road mapping much more flexible, is when you have regular intake sessions scheduled with your team. Jump to the next. So that is that diagram. Once again, it's not the document, but the process. So what is the process of actually going ahead and making a roadmap where you make it significantly easier or more likely that you study the most important things and derive the most value? There are technically 3 big phases, and we talked a little bit about them. First is intake, then it's your prioritization, and then finally you have alignment. Let's start with phase 1, research intake. We define this as a casual group conversation, not necessarily out with friends, but it's not as scary as maybe like a formal stakeholder interview, but it's a conversation with your partners to see what are they curious about in the next 90 days. You want to bucketize that, and we'll talk about why, but you want to have a conversation about what are they curious about right now. And an example intake type schedule might look something like this. You schedule something for 40 minutes. It's not as short as 30 where no one gets a chance to speak. It's not as long as an hour where it's really difficult to find time, but something more manageable. You explain what we're going to be doing during the intake session, and you spend 15 minutes of unfiltered question ideation. The prompt is, what do you want to learn this in the next 90 days? And anything is up for grabs. At this moment, you're going for quantity. You want to see what people are talking about, but you don't necessarily want to say no right here. After that, about 10 to 15 minutes of just a knowledge dump. Some of these questions, if you have a lot of people that are coming for the intake, they might know some of those answers. You might never have to study anything. That research learning might never have to leave this planning phase, and your stakeholders learn and everyone's better for it. So you want to make sure you can understand, what do we already know? And the cool part is, when your team tells you what they already know, you have rough boundaries. You have a parameter or like a set space of saying, they know these things. I don't have to repeat it. And based on what they're interested in, you know where you should be focusing. So your recommendations aren't very crazy. You're not going off into the woods, but you're much more aligned. And then at the end, based on all of the questions, all the things that are still left, the answers that we don't know, you want to go ahead and have a really simple voting. And a really simple kind of piece of advice for just voting. This isn't about voting here. Keep it to 2 votes. 2 votes. Don't give 10 people 10 dots and let them run around. It's really cognitively challenging for the brain to look at 10 ranking options. Keep it 2. This is the most important. If you can't give me this, give me that. Keep it simple. It will speed up voting and it'll make what people vote on so much more impactful rather than just, here's some dots, let's run around. I see we have a question. Should I address it in the Q&A?
Sure. So this is a question from anonymous attendee. They are curious how you would define research partners. Is this primarily product owners and managers or a bigger group of people?
It depends. It depends where you work. If you are on like an embedded team, it probably is your product team, your immediate product team. If it's on a centralized team, it's multiple teams coming together and they probably will change. But the term partner is the people that are invested and excited about your research. It's not a static term of saying it's your engineer, your business person, and yada, yada, yada. It's wherever you work, who is invested, who is either paying for the research or looking at the outcomes. That is how we would define what a research partner is. Right up. Sweet. Cool. If you have other questions, I'll pause. We have plenty of time, and we'll go from there. So if you're in this intake session, this first phase of making that research roadmap, there's probably some questions that you're going to want to ask. And so we've got here. So really great one. What do we want to learn this quarter? Once again, bucketize that time, not an infinite universe, but right now, right here, what should we learn? One of my favorite questions to ask is, what do we want to learn this month to use next month? It completely time boxes it. What are the strategic and tactical goals for next year? What can we do in that time? It really does make research much more impactful if you think about using it in the next 6 to 8 weeks. What doesn't make sense in the analytics? I love this question, especially if your team is quant heavy or analytics. We don't need research. We have log data. We got product analytics, blah. Cool. If your team really likes that, just let them know. Ask them if they're happy with half the story. If you have great analytics, you have half the quantitative data. You're missing on the qualitative. Let's go ahead and spin up some research and see where the gaps in those analytics, what are we measuring incorrectly, things like that. And also what performed better or worse than expected. No matter where you work, people are making predictions for the future. By definition, a prediction has a chance of being wrong. People are mostly wrong. When were your team wrong? Can we figure out why? What didn't go as well as we expected? What went better? And can we figure out the reasons? Can we replicate that as we kind of learn? So
Varun, we've got another question in chat if you want to take that one now. Marvin is asking, I'm curious, which one do you prefer, bigger or smaller group discussion? And what are the pros and cons in this segment?
Oh no. Oh wow, my document is going. What do I prefer? Once again, I hate UX because we have to say it depends, because it really does depend. If your team has never done an ounce of research, a big conversation is a great way to blow up in front of your face. Go for something small. But if your team is working really abstract on crazy ideas, where it's a company that's making socks, now they're going to make spaceships, you want bigger conversations for things like that. So it really does depend on what the aim is and how receptive your team, your environment is to research. So, okay, just like the apple of my eyes. This chat is wild. Okay, and then the things that you want to understand during intake, there's a laundry list of things here. Once again, please read at the end, the deck will be sent out. You want to understand what your partners want to learn. That's the scope. Who do they want to learn from? That's your participants. Why do they want to learn these things? Is it related to a short-term tactical or long-term strategic goal? Who wants to learn? So who's paying for it? Who's invested? Or does anybody want to get involved in research? Can you come take notes? Okay, I've got a list of 100 names. Can you help me recruit 10 people for interviews? That kind of thinking. A rough deadline, that could be, we need it by January 1st. It could be a time frame in the next 3 weeks, or it could be before we launch that mobile tracking feature, we want to go ahead and run some research on this kind of design before it goes out. Then at the end, once again, that information dump, what does everybody already know? So there's a lot of different ways you can approach intake, but the fundamental goal of research intake is for you to stop every single bad question here. You will never do bad research if you stop bad questions from being the thing that you set out to study in the first place. So How can you do that? How can you stop bad questions before you waste any unnecessary time that you don't have? So we got a few strategies for that. The first one is it an experienced research problem? If your stakeholders want to learn something and it's not about someone's behavior, expectations, wants, needs, experiences, the messiness of being a person and using products, or if it's about how to shape the product and its functionality, how people interact with it, how does it react, things like that. Or if it's not about a short-term or long-term experience related goal, how do we get to be the best? How do we make this better? Don't study it. It's not necessarily that these are bad questions, but your skill set, the way you set yourself up to support and help people build amazing things, probably not aligned. So we're going to play a really quick game. I'm going to use the comments here. We're going to play, should you study this? And you can answer with the yes, or you can answer with the no. So in the comments, the first one, should you study this? Is this a research problem? What factors do people consider when choosing to buy a car online? Should you study this? All right, seems like crowd consensus. I would agree. This would be a good question. Yes, set out to study this. You can learn a ton here. You can not only understand how people make better purchasing decisions, but how the product has to reflect that and when we build it. Next one. What are the attitudes of the largest segment? Is this a research problem? Okay, fantastic. A few people in the comments are like, it needs refinement. It depends. Tell me more. Attitudes about what? I would put this as a maybe. So once again, this is one of those things in life where you say yes or no, and then I come up with a maybe answer. It's a maybe. This could be something interesting, but attitudes, how does somebody define what an attitude is? What attitudes about what? Largest segment of everyone, of what population? This is a great way to say someone is interested in learning. Let's go ahead and refine on what we actually want to learn. Next one. How many people used the product last Wednesday? Should you study this? Is this a research problem? Overwhelming consensus is no. This is a single statistic. Knowing that 1,000 people logged on last week, probably not going to help you make better product decisions and stop letting bad products get out into the world. And the last one, what's the best price? Oh, I gave it away. Darn. I pressed the space bar too fast. Well, no, you shouldn't. This has to do with pricing psychology, behavioral economics. It has to do with how people ascribe value to things. It's not that it's not an important problem. There might be a data analyst or someone that's good at pricing that can actually be much more effective on helping with this out. So the goal here is not to necessarily say no to everything. There are actions. Become a connector. Your team will ask you for an infinite number of things. If once they learn that you can research and learn more effectively and build cool stuff, they'll want to keep doing it. But not every question is going to be about experience research or user research. Become a connector. Can you tap into the information network at your company with the data science team, the marketing team, the HR team, and can you help guide your team to other areas and say, hey, we can't study this, but John down the street, he's going to be very effective. And you're still seen as a knowledgeable person, but you're not adding this to your roadmap where you're constantly looking for small pieces of information. So become a connector, get involved, understand your information network. That's going to save you time and time again. The second strategy is the now, next, never framework. There's a lot happening here. I don't want to drain every single line, but the big takeaway is when questions come in, you want to think about studying them now, things that are urgent, quick deadlines, things that you want to study next. This is the idea of roadmap and thinking for the future. Then you have the idea of a research backlog. We could study this. We're not sure if it's super important or we should prioritize it. Let's hold on to it. Then the last area is around never. These are the unethical questions. These are the questions that sound super interesting. Do people like blue dinosaurs? Interesting. It's probably not going to help you build a better mobile tracking experience. Probably shouldn't study it. And then also it has to do with such as very specific questions that you probably can't study. Should we use red or blue buttons? Unless you have a very large a lot amount of traffic, you're probably not going to see enough results and get credible results to say, hey, red is actually better. So the cool part of never type questions, these unethical, uninteresting, fruitless questions, refine them. What is actually important, right? That is the takeaway. They care about something. What is that? Can we reframe it to something ethical and something that can be studied now, either planned to be studied in the future? Then the last strategy is the next 90 days. Okay, we got a question.
Hi, Varun. This question
Wow.
is for me. You just touched on a very, very interesting part that a lot of UXers deal with, right? What happened, for me, my question is, what happened when a stakeholder want to know a research question that you deem to be bad? You didn't think it was interesting or it's actually not suitable, but they want it and they want it now.
Probably the most common type of situation in the sense that we need it and it's urgent and I told you to. Number one, that is an indication that it's a research immature culture. So just keep that in mind, that people here don't see research as a process. They see it as a thing that we go in and get answers and we get what we need. Research is much more involved. The second thing is some of these ideas, you're right, not everything is going to apply, but you have to build your research culture. One of the things that we talk at the end is that these research cultures, the best researchers on the planet, these organizations, they weren't doing amazing research at the beginning. In the beginning, their stakeholders came and said, I need this and I need you to jump because I told you and I'm paying for it. But slowly, over time, they built much more effective research cultures. So if your stakeholder wants you to study it, sometimes you got to bite the bullet and say, okay, but use that as a place to build that relationship. This time, Jason, we're taking a qualitative approach. Some of the questions are a little leading, but we can still learn. For the next one, let's set up time a little bit earlier so we can work together on a better interview guide, right? So you're reframing it. What you've done in the situation is that you've explained it's qualitative, so that means something. And some of the questions are leading. Okay, so I've learned two things. And then you've also said for the next study, we can do it this way. So you've now put together two separate studies and you're like, okay, I'm building this. It is a process. It's not as simple as tomorrow you're going to use these questions, wham, bam, everything is going to go amazing. You have to build it slowly over time. We don't cover stakeholder interviews and things that you do between studies here, but those are some of the things that would help. I think you got two other unanswered questions. Curious how, okay, all right. So it looks like we've answered both of those. And I'm going to jump into the next one. Questions are great. Feel free to ask. So this next 90 days, we keep talking about the next 90 days. Why this specific number? Well, it's short enough that you can scope out and manage. And the cool part is 90 days maps up to a quarter. Your business partners speak in quarters. So you can say, what do we want to research in the next quarter? And then you can plan that out very effectively. But it's also long enough to see value and measure impact. On this right side, this visual here, in this case, this researcher is running a bunch of different studies. There's several intake sessions, which makes that really flexible because it can change, it can mold to what the team needs. These stars represent deliverables. That's a ton happening. And it's still pretty breathable. There's not this multiple studies happening, there's breaks in between. This is enough that your team can start to see research as dynamic, as powerful, not just let's wait 6 weeks for something, let's move a little bit faster. So you can actually start to see research in that 90 days. And the goal is to schedule those intake sessions on your team's calendar as well as the roadmap. Once again, the roadmap is a tool designed to get alignment and people excited about research, but put the intake on the calendar. A good rule is at least one intake per session if you're doing research every month. If not, you might need to kind of think about every 2 months or every quarter, whatever fits to whatever team they're working on. So once we're done with intake, then you get into the strategy for prioritization. Once again, ton of information here, but these in dark blue, let's go ahead and think about these specific strategies that you can use to prioritize. So you know kind of what's important, you've got a bunch of questions, you know what people kind of already know, and you know how long you have. How can you prioritize when to study and how to study something? First prioritization strategy to get the most out of that 90 days, you want to address a mix of tactical and strategic goals, right? Tactical goals, we want to make the page 10% faster. That kind of thinking versus strategic, we want to enter an entirely new market, or we make socks, we want to build spaceships, that level of future thinking. You want to be able to address both of those if you can. What our non-research partners probably don't think about or maybe recognize, at least consciously, is that research knowledge decays, especially when it's applied toward a problem. We're not talking about what are all the elements in the universe, that will stay for the end of time. But we're talking about how do we build better products today. If we use a research and everything changes, that knowledge decays very quickly. I'm not looking at last year's usability test because the product has changed so much. I'm looking ahead. So if you map out kind of looking at strategic and tactical goals, the knowledge you get, strategic knowledge tends to decay much slower. These things don't change often because the world is not as malleable. Whereas the tactical research, not only is your team trying to change the experience, the product, the service, whatever, every other team is changing everything around that experience as well. So because everything's constantly shifting, that knowledge becomes less and less useful over time. So the takeaway is try to tackle at least one strategic goal per quarter. That is an uncomfortable conversation to have. What is important? What is our North Star vision? What do we think we can get done in the next 5 years? Those kinds of conversations, uncomfortable, super important for you to recognize so you can actually get ahead. And maybe if one strategic study per quarter is challenging, maybe every 6 months, we try to challenge and look into the future. If you don't plan for the strategies to manifest today, they will never happen. And this is a fantastic way to expand what research actually is. The other prioritization strategy is to start playing question Tetris. Questions just kind of seem like questions, just like things that we want to know. But if you can start to group them, you can start to see, hey, I had 15 different questions, 15 things that my team really wanted to know. Can I start to group them based on what's similar? Are they looking at the same population? Is it the same topic? What have you? So you can say instead of 15 questions, looks like we have to plan out 3 really solid studies addressing some of these kind of areas of investigation. So the action step is take your incoming questions, the ones that you have, the knowledge and all of that, can you group them by similar populations or topics? If you're already recruiting new users, can you have that new user study be a bit more jam-packed or answering a ton of new user questions instead of you're running a week study here, a 2-week study here, a week study here. And then the other one is to encourage your team to ask some of those sub-research questions. Help them feel involved. This is a process. This is coming together. It's not that you're the expert, you're going to run off, come back with the data, let them ask questions, and then tuck them in to other studies that are already planned. So people feel heard, you can bring that knowledge, but you're not setting out to study that, do people like blue dinosaurs? And then the last strategy here is around parallel pathing. There's only one you, time only goes one way. If someone can make time go the other way, please contact me. My email will be here. If you don't have infinite time and infinite resources, which you probably don't, parallel path, 3 things. 1, conduct secondary research. You're not running out to collect primary data. You're looking at what's already known or what's available. Really effective strategy to answer some of those interesting smaller questions. You want to go unmoderated? Can you have an unmoderated card sorting tool do the research for you, and then you analyze the data, allowing you to spend your time elsewhere? And also get stakeholder involvement. Fun fact, this is not the Apple and Banana team, but it's a really nice looking group of people. And it looks really like they're really involved, right? But if you can get your stakeholders involved to help take notes, analyze something, help set up the room, help tear it down, that kind of thinking, you can start to expand your time and make the most. So you're not doing all this prep work. You're focusing on challenges that maybe you are only suited to address. So the takeaway is we're not going to train it here, but strengths and weaknesses of secondary research, unmoderated studies, and getting new stakeholders involved. Use all 3 of them. You have access to all of them, so use all of the tools that you have. And if you don't have access to an unmoderated tool or a single place where you can store all of your research, that is a great signal to grow your research operations. If you don't build a better research culture, it will never manifest. It's not going to show up tomorrow. So you have to think sustainably about what you can do now to use next month to become faster and faster. And I think there's a question. Who designed the deck? It is clean. It was not me. It is our head of design at Apple Banana. So I appreciate the compliment. I will pass it on.
I actually have a question for you before you move to the next one. So my question is, when you're trying to identify feature to develop, right, doing generative research, like improvement on existing product, the problem is you don't know what you don't know yet. So you don't even know the question, and it's hard to prioritize in that case. Do you have any advice on that situation?
The best limiting constraints, or the 2 best limiting constraints, is time. How long will you let me study the infinite universe? Most people will not say forever. So that's one, so you know what to focus on. Number two, what can our team actually do? There's only a handful of things that even the biggest companies can do at any time. If this is generative research, and if people say we make socks and people want us to make spaceships, we're not going to be able to do anything with that. But if we set out to understand our sock making company, are people interested in shirts? Well, then you can go ahead and structure research around that. Exploratory, discovery, generative type research is really like you're going on a dark woods at night and you can't see around you, but there's still a road. There's still only certain places that your team is actually build meaningful experiences. Once you isolate and figure that out, then the world, this infinite craziness becomes a lot smaller. It doesn't go away completely, but you at least know we can only do X in this time. What can be learned in that time to make the best decisions?
Advice. Thank you.
Is there another question? Who designed that? Okay, that was okay. Sweet. Okay. And then now you intake questions. Man, this is a long journey, right? You're getting tired at the end of this. You get all these questions. People are excited. They're like, I want to learn everything. You sat down by yourself and you prioritize the questions. You're making this roadmap. Start studying, right? Just jump, go ahead, take the time. False. Pause, get alignment. It is so important because research is not a thing. It is not an object. It is not a place. It is a process. It is an abstract conceptualization of people coming together to learn cool stuff, to build cool stuff. You have to get everybody on the same page. By the time you intake a question, then you prioritize and align and then propose, this is our research roadmap, things will have changed. And that's fine, but you want to be on the same page before you start studying. So the big rule here is don't start without alignment. Whatever you can, it is better to delay and push out a roadmap to get more aligned and get more secure and confident what's important than to spend 3 months studying the wrong thing. So take the time, get uncomfortable, get alignment. My favorite question to ask is, what, if any, changes do we need to make to the research timelines? Not us, not you versus me, you tell me to jump and I do whatever. You have only X amount of time and finite resources, so it has to be a conversation. Can you replace? Can you say, instead of studying this now, can we push that down later? Or can we put this on the backlog and revisit? It has to be together. And be ready for change. People always change their mind about what's important. That is actually good. People are telling you, don't do bad research. Don't study this thing. Don't waste your time and give me a deck that I'll do nothing with. They're saying, I don't care about this. This is much more important. You don't necessarily want to study every change, but you still want to be focused on what are those long and short-term goals, and then be able to be flexible on what you study. Take questions. If people want to add new stuff, put it on the backlog. And once again, schedule a research intake session, maybe after the first 1 or 2 studies, and then become flexible, right? That roadmap starts to change because we've learned cool stuff. We've got better questions that we want you to address. Then make it visual and then send it to those who need to align. If you can make it visual, it can become much more powerful and fun to look at instead of a spreadsheet or like a Jira road mapping chart, things like that. Keep it simple. I like to just screenshot 3 different calendar months and then put in my rough timelines, then have people react to that either in a Miro or in a PowerPoint, whatever works. That is good enough. Once again, the goal isn't to make the prettiest looking roadmap. The goal is to get people aligned to say this is important, and we will continue to want these things by the time you study it and bring it back. And the last one, send it out to those who weren't actually there. If your senior product owner decided to jet off to Jupiter the minute you needed him or her, you need that person's approval. The last thing you want is to be halfway through a really effective structured roadmap where people feel aligned. Then the lead person comes in and throws a whole wrench into the whole operation. So make sure you send out as a document, do a one-on-one, do remote, whatever. Make sure that people see it before you go ahead and set out to study it. And then I guess there's the 4th phrase, right? Get started with research. By this time, you should know what's important, what do people already know, how you want to study something, when to study something, and then go ahead and get started. So section 3, debrief and wrap up, then we can have Q&A at the end. The final biggest strategy when you're thinking about flexible and like research road mapping over time is you want to think long-term and be selective. Like I said, has anyone here heard of any of these companies? Facebook, now Meta. I'll probably only ever call it Facebook. I don't know about Meta. Facebook, Apple, Amazon, right? All these big name companies, they had very small, scrappy, and crappy research practices when they first started. Now these companies are paving the way for new ways of approaching research. There's nothing to say that if you start building now in a few years, what have you, your culture can be really powerful. You can attract cool talent, you can study cool problems, and you can help research be much more integral instead of, hey, we did research, let's continue on with whatever the heck we were doing. So start small, build over time. If you don't build for the future will still come and you'll be left holding your hands. So think about improving your operations, how all your research fits together, all your tools, collaboration, get them excited. Education, I love to just set up time and talk about certain concepts, things that my team wants to know. And then reporting templates, stop making big decks. If you're going to run short-term research, stop making a deck that takes you longer than the research that you actually did. That's not helping anybody. That doesn't make research seem dynamic and flexible. It seems rigid, and it shows that you have a lot of investment in learning how to make a PowerPoint. Your team isn't excited about that. So think about structuring it, making it shorter, things like that. And then always be selective and ask yourself, if you only get 8 to 13 studies per year where you can actually push the product forward, the experience, stop bad ideas from going out and negatively hurting people that you care about and are invested in, ask yourself, do I want to study this? And think critically about that answer. If your gut says no, there's probably a good reason why. And so the last action step that we have here is budget small tasks so you can get done in that 90 days. At the end of this 90 days, can I have 2 deliverable templates? One that's super short, that's just a quick email, I can copy, paste, and add my stuff. And another maybe 20, 25 page deck where I can quickly plug and play and make reports, right? If you don't budget that time, you will still be caught up just struggling to do research, getting fatigued, getting burnt out, jumping, instead of being much more selective and strategic on how you do research. And so the last idea here, recognize that doing some sloppy research, that is the first step to a great research culture. So tomorrow, recognize what is sloppy here about how we think and how we learn about the experience outside of who we talk to every single day, this in-group mentality, right? How do we learn? How do we start from there? Last thing here, we've got a book coming out in 2022. You can join our book waitlist at this link. I can go ahead and drop that in the comments. And so book contents here, we go deeper into the fruitful research philosophy, meaningful, ethical, sustainable, valuable. What does that mean? How does that manifest? We talk about practical ideas for running a full range of kind of short-term and long-term type research. If you want to look at qualitative data analysis, mixed methods research, think about recruiting participants, sample size, all the way down to reporting and storytelling. That's going into the book. And then also closer to 30 plus guides now in the book. Think about using the chi-square test, research storytelling, writing a research plan, choosing a deliverable, things like that. Handy guides tucked into the back. So it's easy and accessible so you can consistently build and run great research. And so this is a quick screenshot from the homepage, from the book waitlist page at that link. If you sign up now, you can get 15 pages right away and then 20% off when we launch. We're still tweaking with some of the design and how Apple Banana will play into the narrative of the book and how they talk and all that, but it will be exciting to see when it comes out. So with that, question and answer time.
Wow, Varun, it's such a great presentation, and thank you so much. And I would encourage everybody who attend this to check out his book. I learned a lot today, and thanks a lot for giving us a preview into what does it mean to be doing fruitful research. So we have a question on the Q&A. Are there any resources or suggestions on how to conduct research road mapping at an organization that has limited research maturity?
So technically, no. I've been looking for it. So I had to create different strategies after talking to researchers from big tech all the way down to startups and like what's working. So I've abstracted some of those ideas into this deck. But the bigger idea here is that if you have a limited research maturity, you might never get a chance to research roadmap. So you want to think about building the research culture. Can you make it more accessible? Can you make it more inviting? That kind of thinking. But road mapping technically is more of an emergent property. People are like, we need to study a bunch of stuff. We've got a whole team here. It can evolve. But to start, think about the next study and how do you make that as most inclusive as possible. That can be the first place to build. This is not a thing that pops up and then the next week, everything is amazing. It is an intentional process of setting up defenses, being strategic, connecting folks to the right area. It's more of an orchestra. But at first, you have to pick up the violin and start to play before you get to the big kind of concert. That was a strange analogy, but I don't know if that made sense, but it makes sense in my brain. Elena
Me.
said, go ahead.
All right, so we have another question. How long before the next 90 days do you plan for the next 90?
So you can do it in two ways. One, the 90 days is designed to make road mapping more approachable to your team because they're like, oh, it's only 3 months, whatever, maybe it's not that expensive in the next 3 months. That is why we do that. But also the roadmap is a nice cadence. So the goal is for the next quarter, 2 weeks before the next quarter starts, you would roadmap once again. Most likely, once you start a roadmap and you can start to deliver value, you just kind of go ad infinitum, right? You don't necessarily have to wait till the new quarter, but you can set it as a cycle. We're going to study these things, maybe pivot as needed. And then come March 31st or March 15th, I guess, for April 1st, we will come back together to be realigned on what's important. So it's more of a strategy to get your team talking about doing research rather than every 90 days, it's set in stone. We need to kind of be rigid with that thinking. Will recording be available? Will presentation be shareable? I would love to share it with the team. Yes, Andy, Jason, keep me honest. Keep me honest here. Will it be shared? I believe it will be.
Yes, we will be getting this deck from Varun and sharing it out with the audience.
Fantastic.
And we will also be sharing the recording and access to this recording. So to answer the next question, yes, we recorded this and we'll send a link to that shortly after tonight, once we get it all packaged together and cleaned up.
Favorite research question you've studied? Favorite research question? It really happened. It happened at the start of the pandemic. I went from a team that I was doing a lot of at Best Buy, a lot of in-person research, and then I went to a services-based team where I'm now. And the pandemic happened, and everything about this group of employees and customers I was working with had to do with physically being in their home, in a car, in close proximity. So then my team was like, how do we do kind of field research during a pandemic? And so I thought it was like a really innovative type of approach. I was like, I need to think about this more effectively. Not innovative, really interesting type of problem. And I really appreciate like that challenge of I can't go and I don't know what's happening. How do I kind of use the data and the tools around me? And so that was really fun. So, and then for the 3 road mapping phases, the first and last phase is collaborative, and the middle phase more about. I would argue yes. If you have a team of researchers, you can prioritize much more effectively, especially if you're in a centralized model. It's 3 or 4 researchers, or maybe 5, 10 teams, whatever. Then you want to be prioritizing together. Can you delegate? Can you share? If you're by yourself, my best rule would be to do it by yourself, because your stakeholders can subtly, or not even subtly, just flat out tell you, I need this now, I need this there. And then you become someone that takes orders. You're not necessarily a thoughtful partner in building an experience. It's Varun will jump when I tell him to jump, so I'm going to tell him to jump. So you want to prioritize and go from there. At the end of the day, if you're doing research, you have the final say as that researcher. So that is something you have to become uncomfortable and say no. And I think that's where you can really start to build respect that we're not just going to do whatever, we're going to do things with intention, be more strategic. What else? Chat. Jake. Hello, Jake.
So the next question is
I think we covered this one. Oh.
Yeah. If your organization has strategic knowledge that was obtained previously that became core understanding, but you know that it's time to reframe some of that, how do you conduct research to make sure that those knowledge are now being reframed and challenged?
The knowledge, can you say that again?
So let's say that like a core part of the product is now needing to be reframed, right? How do you design research to make sure that those knowledge is now being asked in a different way and understood in a different way so that you get better?
If you have to reframe, I don't know if I'm understanding your question properly, so correct me if I'm wrong, but what I would say is I would maybe look at 2 different approaches. If it's reframing, what's working, what's not, really simple. Then you can even look at experimental design. Can you segment some folks, give them the current, measure that, make changes, measure that, and compare? Is that kind of what you're talking about? I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding.
Yeah, I feel like that could have been an entire different presentation. Yeah.
There are so many like micro niche little like things. You're like, how the heck do I overcome this by myself? And then you Google online and it's not there. So people are muddling through. we want Apple and Banana to be more about practical advice. This stuff actually works because we've tried it, that kind of thinking. And then can you link the roadmap with budgeting? It depends. It depends. If your team does not care about paying for research, I would not necessarily put budget on there, but I would have it as a conversation. One of my favorite questions to ask, especially if it's a product team or a finance team that you can work with, what is the smallest amount of money we can experiment with on research this quarter? $1,000, right? Say they, how about only $1,000 for over the next 3 months? Great, you have $333 per month that you didn't have before. Can you be more strategic? Can you be smarter about what you study? So road mapping and budgeting can go together. I personally kind of abstract that. I've had the luxury of working with bigger companies where budget maybe not the biggest issue, but if you have a smaller one, you might want to put $200 for this study, 100 here, like Monopoly, really allocating. But what really matters more is the priority and how quickly and how early you do that research. That can be correlated with money, but I personally try to get away from the money question, because then that's a really brute force way of looking at research. If I paid $10,000 for research this year, and I paid $1 million for research next year, arguably I should learn $1 million worth of research. That's not how things work, right? That's not how research and how people learn. So I personally stay away from budgeting if I can. I think I understand the question. If they want to change things, you should ask the same question, because evaluators know people change. I would agree with Michelle, and don't be afraid to ask some questions. You may not understand output. 100%. People are not static. Nothing about a person is static. It is dynamic. It is changing. You're constantly making sense of the world around you. Even if you're the same demographic, everybody that fits this demographic profile is the same. False. People change. Everything changes. That is why research. The coolest part of research, no matter where you work, you will learn something if you set up yourself to learn. If you go out saying, what do people care about? It's unstructured. But if you structure it, you will guaranteed always learn something. You'll be better off in how you kind of approach the world. So I think it's a fantastic approach. Thank you, Michelle. We have what, a few minutes left. We have exactly 1 minute left. Well, with that, I want to say thank you to everyone that showed up. And I will stop sharing my screen. Feel free to reach out. The Apple Banana team is very accessible on Twitter, on LinkedIn, whatever works. Our goal is to have more and more conversations where we get to build kind of the future of what research looks like. And that only starts when people challenge some of these ideas, apply some of these ideas, and continue to come out to cool events like this. So thank you, Andy. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, UXPA team, for having a small portion of the Apple and Banana team.
Yeah, thanks again, Varun. Everyone is giving a virtual round of applause for the talk today, for the great Q&A session. Really appreciate your time.